Thank you very much for joining us today. This Australian Local Government Accelerating Action to COP26 Virtual Forum. I'm Steve Gawler, I'm the Regional Director of ICLEI Oceania, and it's my pleasure to moderate today. The purpose of today is to engage local governments across Australia to understand the pathways that we can use to contribute to the UN Climate Conference, COP26 in Glasgow, which unbelievably starts in 10 days' time, but also to add our voices to the loud cry for urgent action nationally back here in Australia. So we've got a dual focus today. This is a critical time, nationally and globally. We have to make sure that the voices of local government are heard here and internationally as part of the COP26 process. So today we're going to hear from several of our local government leaders. There will then be a short panel discussion. And finally, we're going to hear from ICLEI's Global Advocacy Coordinator. We'd like to acknowledge all of the mayors and elected members who are joining us today, and also the many other participants. Unbelievably, we've had over 200 people register for today's event, so that's incredible. Just a few of the nuts and bolts, please. We would like you to keep your cameras on, your videos on, so that we have a sense of a live audience. Use the chat function, please, for questions, and we'll be drawing on that for the panel discussion. If you can, please rename yourself on the participants list so we know where you're from, and hopefully also which traditional land or country you're joining from. As you can see, we're recording the event, and that recording will be available afterwards. Jess, can we have the slide of the co-hosts, please? Because we'd like to acknowledge the very strong support of the Australian Local Government Association and of the Council for Capital City Lord Mayors. And these are the many other groups supporting the event and supporting the local government push for climate action in Australia. So to enter into the program now, we're going to start where we should always start, and that's with an acknowledgement of country. And it's my great pleasure to introduce Pastor Ray Minicon from the Scarred Trees Ministries. And it looks like he's sitting on top of a mountain. So Ray, over to you for your mountaintop message.
Let me just unmute myself. Thanks, Andrew. Yes, it's a video I took of flying into Cairns, and I just put it against the window of the plane and turned it on slow-mo, and that's what I got. Look, it's such a privilege and an honour to be here with you this afternoon to give an acknowledgement of country. And I'm also a part of the executive of the Indigenous Peoples Organisation here in Australia, and we too have, for the first time, got a grassroots movement to put to COP26 some of the incredibly important issues that we think are should be included in the discussions around that. And so we're looking at a whole range of just approaches to climate mitigation. We want to make sure that our decision-making processes are a part of that. And when you think about it, for the last 60,000 years, we kept our country very, very, very well we looked after it. And so these last 200 years, we've seen some incredible changes to our country. And we want to see if we can, for us, we want to see the CO2 emissions cut by 75% in the next 10 years, by 2030. And by 2035, we would love to see 100%. This is a huge, big challenge for all Indigenous peoples. We'd like to see a retreat from reliance on coal seam gas. We'd like to see no more new coal mines. We'd love to see government subsidies, remove all those subsidies for extractive industries. And we want to see our people start to get employed with the new priorities that are coming out of this whole thing. But they're just some of the things that we're looking at. One of the good things about local government is that it's the government that is closest to the people. And if I had in my hands the power in this country, I would get rid of state governments and perhaps even the federal governments and just go with local government. I think it's a lot more powerful. You offer a lot more services and you do a lot more better things because you're the government that's closest to the people. But I hold in my hands here a piece of the soil from whose lands I now live on. And I'm from the Kabi Kabi people in southeast Queensland, my father's side, and Goreng Goreng on my mother's side. And so this soil is from the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation. And I just want to acknowledge the wisdom, knowledge, and expertise of the Gadigal ancestors in their custodianship of these lands that I now call my home. I acknowledge and recognize the families and children of the Gadigal clan who lived and celebrated and communed on these lands for millennia. But I also acknowledge and recognize all the blood that was shed on these lands and through this soil, either in violence or in innocence. I acknowledge and recognize the elders who have come recently, who have toiled and died on these lands and in this soil, but they've left us a legacy that all people can enjoy the benefits of the labor on this soil today. I also acknowledge now the responsibility I have in stewarding and caring for these lands and this soil. This responsibility now rests on my shoulders. My responsibility is to care for the land and the soil of which I now live so that our children's children can celebrate and enjoy the fruits of this soil so that they too can live a healthy, proper, prosperous and happy life on the land and soil of the Gadigal people. I also acknowledge and recognize all of our collective responsibilities that we all have to care for the lands and soils that we have the honor to be birthed upon, to live upon, and to work upon. Let's affirm our connection to the lands we now live and work upon. Let's acknowledge our elders who worked on these lands for our benefit. Let's pledge that we too will steward the land according to the wisdom, the knowledge, and the expertise that we now possess, so that we can pass on to our children's children the best that our land can provide for them and their children's children. And let us also undertake together the important task to care for our Mother Earth, so that our future generations are not robbed or deprived of their rightful inheritance that is our responsibility to pass on to them, so that they too can enjoy the same entitlements and benefits that we have enjoyed on these lands and upon this soil that we all call our home. Thanks, brother. Back to you.
Thank you, Uncle Ray. That was a very powerful message and a great way to start our forum. And we have another powerful message too, coming from right at the other side of the world. We were very lucky to be able to secure a special message from one of the two high-level champions for COP26. And so this is Mr. Gonzalo Munoz from Chile. And his role, as the same as Nigel Topping, is for rallying parties and rallying non-state actors across the world to achieve the goals of the Paris Agreement. Quite apart from being a climate champion, Gonzalo is also a business entrepreneur in his own country and a social change maker. He's been at the forefront of environmental innovation in Chile and responsible for reinventing the country's recycling and zero waste industry. So we'll now play a very short message from Gonzalo to this forum. Thanks, Jess.
We have heard loud and clear the code red for humanity from this year's IPCC report. The United Nations Climate Conference, COP26 in Glasgow, is definitely pivotal to keep 1.5 degrees alive and to build the resilience that we need. I firmly believe in the power of radical collaboration and humanity's capacity to act now to change our direction. It is my nature to be hopeful, but this hope is grounded in reality, through the action of the diversity of stakeholders who are committed not only to survive, but to thrive in spite of the climate crisis. This is why the United Kingdom, as COP26 president, has spearheaded the Race to Zero to rally non-state actors, including companies, cities, regions, financial institutions, and educational institutions all around the world to take rigorous and immediate action to halve global emissions by 2030 and deliver a healthier, fairer, zero carbon world in time in 2050 at the very, very latest. All members are committed to the same overarching goal, reducing emissions across all scopes swiftly and fairly, in line with the Paris Agreement, with transparent action plans and robust near-term targets. Cities Race to Zero is one of the most successful and exciting approaches to build consensus on meeting ambitious net zero targets. Our aim was to recruit 1,000 cities by COP26, and I am so pleased and thankful to announce that we now have 1,040 officially included as the first intake, including 17 leadership of cities and councils who have pledged from Australia. We want that support from Australian cities and local governments to continue beyond COP26, to continue to show the momentum in the race to zero emissions and resilient future. Cities and local governments are one of our secret weapons to achieving net zero locally and globally. In the decisive decade for climate action, it is really inspiring to see the growing number of Australian local governments working to deliver ambitious net zero targets as soon as possible through the Cities Race to Zero, the Global Covenant of Measures, and many other initiatives. The actions of local governments, of businesses, industries, youth, academia should be seen as a signal to the Australian government that a net zero target is never out of reach. It is heartening to realize that if the emission reduction targets already set by Australian local governments were met, then an incredible 88,200 kilotons of CO2 equivalent emissions would be reduced. These commitments would bring Australia 96% of the way to meet its current target of 28% reduction by 2030, and through a meaningful funding and delivery partnership with the Australian government, be able to deliver on net zero and improve adaptation and resilience for the entire Australian society, industry, and economy. So thank you to all the Australian local governments who are taking action. Together, I'm sure we can keep 1.5 degree alive and win this race together.
Thank you very much, Mr. Gonzalo Munoz, one of the climate champions. And it's great to hear we already have 17 cities in Australia who have pledged to the Race to Zero. And maybe after today's session, there will be many more join that important campaign. So now we'd like to start hearing, coming closer to home and hearing from some of our climate leaders, our local government climate leaders. And it's my great pleasure to first introduce Councillor Amanda Stone. Amanda is a long-serving councillor at the City of Yarra, and I think has been mayor there twice. She chairs the ICLEI Oceania Regional Executive Committee, and as such, she also sits on the ICLEI Global Executive Committee, and she is also a portfolio holder for, I think it's called Ecosystems Protection and Biodiversity. So a very strong supporter of ICLEI and climate change. And it's my pleasure to hand over to Amanda just to set the scene for today. Thanks, Amanda.
Thank you, Steve. Can I begin by thanking Pastor Ray for his beautiful and powerful introduction, which I think could not be more timely, and also acknowledge the traditional owners of the land where I'm on today, the Wurundjeri people, and pay my respects to their elders, past, present and emerging. It's a real pleasure to, I think, to join you under the circumstances today, representing ICLEI local governments for sustainability on the eve of COP26, as we've heard, our last chance to agree to avert dangerous climate change, and to talk about the pathways to the COP for local government. Most of you will know that ICLEI is a global organisation for local government, city leaders and their partners to accelerate local sustainable development. And the Oceania team supports local governments right across Australia, New Zealand and the Pacific to take greater action on climate change. ICLEI Oceania is also the regional secretariat for the Global Covenant of Mayors, which some of you may belong to, which has over 10,000 cities and towns globally who have committed to action on climate change using science-based targets. We also work in partnerships with organisations like our co-hosts today, the Australian Local Government Association, the Council of Capital City Lord Mayors, Local Government New South Wales, and other supporters today. You know, as a long-term city councillor like you, I know the power of local governments when they partner with their communities to effect change. From affordable, accessible childcare to the circular economy and lots of other things, local government with its meagre resources has consistently broken ground in leading and championing important issues to their communities. But it's in climate action where local government has really shone. And this is not just big talk from a proud and passionate councillor. It's substantiated in the 2 studies which Gonzalo referred to and which you will hear about later in this session. So how does this very impressive level of government find a voice into the United Nations Climate Conference, COP26 in Glasgow? Well, there are 4 pathways. Firstly, ICLEI internationally is the focal point for the local government community to provide input into the United Nations Climate Conference and its processes. And so it provides a voice for local governments and their communities into that process. Work on this has been ongoing for quite some time and will continue. The second pathway, as we've also heard from Gonzalo, is the Race to Zero campaign. This is the rallying campaign for all sectors in the lead up to and beyond COP26. And the local government pathway, part of this is the Cities Race to Zero. The Cities Race to Zero is a campaign of the UK COP26 presidency and their high-level champions, and it's the official pathway to COP26, supported by many programs and campaigns, including the Global Covenant of Mayors. And it aims to rally up leadership and support from not just cities, but also regions and businesses and investors to stay on track, to try and stay on track for the 1.5 degree warming. As Gonzalo said, their aim was to recruit 1,000 cities by the time COP26 came around, and they have 1,040, which is fabulous. Now that deadline has closed, but you can still register because this is an enduring campaign. Action on climate is not going to stop in Glasgow in November. So it still needs lots more support to keep the movement going. The third pathway in the past has been physically turning up to COP. ICLEI Oceania has supported mayors and elected members who are championing climate action in their councils to go to a COP, and many of you may have had that opportunity. That's obviously not possible this time, but a fourth pathway that's been developed by ICLEI Oceania is a communique. This will be taken forward into COP26, and it will be based on those 2 important reports we've already talked about, which demonstrate local governments across the country offer a pathway for an ambitious national net zero target to be achieved. And I know other speakers are going to speak about this, but this is really important. The work that local governments do can achieve our national goals. We have so much to offer. The ICLEI Oceania communique on behalf of local governments across Australia seeks a meaningful partnership with the Australian government to deliver a national net zero target and improve adaptation and resilience across Australia. It also calls on the Australian government to commit to steep emission reductions this decade, to support a dedicated federal funding stream to local government for climate mitigation and adaptation, and to support global programs like Global Covenant of Mayors and Cities Race to Zero, which support local governments. Because of course, local governments know that cooperative action at all levels and across all sectors is needed to deeply and rapidly cut our emissions, whilst also preparing, unfortunately, for the climate impacts that we know can no longer be avoided. So this communique calls on governments at all levels and non-state actors to take rigorous and immediate action to deliver a healthier, fairer, zero carbon world. And I know you at local government level are absolutely playing your part. Thank you for your ongoing commitment to climate action for your communities, both present and future. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Amanda Stone, for setting the scene for us today. And we'd like to move now onto the national level, and my pleasure to introduce Councillor Linda Scott, who's a councillor at the City of Sydney, but importantly, President of the Australian Local Government Association. And Linda is going to give us a message at the national level from ALGA. So Linda, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I'd like to join the wonderful Pastor Ray Minnicon in acknowledging the many different First Nations lands that we are meeting on today. I'm here in the City of Sydney in my lounge room, so here on Gadigal land, and I pay my respects to the Eora Nation, the Gadigal elders past and present, for their magnificent continuing custodianship of this land. You can tell I know Pastor Ray from his great passion for local government, particularly his views about state and federal government. So thank you for the welcome, Pastor Ray, but also thank you for your acknowledgement about the great work that local government does. I'd also like to really thank ICLEI and their board. I know, and it's great to hear your words, Councillor Stone. I see others on the board, like my friend Nuatali Nelms from Newcastle here. We're so proud to partner with you in this work that we all are seeking to do. And I'm so grateful for the work of your Secretariat and all your members in supporting these activities. And it's also great to be working alongside the many capital city Lord Mayors. And it's great in particular, of course, to have the Honourable Anna Reynolds, the Lord Mayor of Hobart, with us today. I'd also just like to acknowledge all the mayors and councillors, and I'm sure there are also council staff on this session today. Thank you so much for all the work that you're doing and hopefully are also going to do in the lead up to COP. I'm obviously speaking to you today in my capacity as the President of the Australian Local Government Association, but this is something I do also feel extremely personally passionate about. My dad was an environmental scientist. I grew up in a family where, you know, we were lucky enough to learn from a very young age about the benefits of the worm farm, recycling, turning off lights, doing all those things at the household level to protect our local environment and reduce our output as a household. And I think these are lessons that local governments apply on a day-to-day basis and help our communities to do. But at the national local government level, there's also so much more we can do together. ALGA is very proud to represent the nation's 537 local governments, and we do that through the membership of the state and territory associations. We advocate at the national level on behalf of local governments, and one of our board's priority areas is, of course, action on climate change. Collectively, Australian councils employ nearly 200,000 people, and in some communities, we are the largest employers in that town. We manage $460 billion of infrastructure, and we invest stacks of funding into our local communities through building and maintaining infrastructure and providing services. What is common around the country is that local government is the community level of government. We are the people that our communities turn to in a time of crisis, and the heart of our responsibilities is making great, safe, happy, livable, wonderful places for the people that live in our communities. And in the face of that, climate change is something that we have for many, many decades been dealing with, managing, planning for, and also protecting our communities against. It's, of course, a powerful force because both it threatens to harm our communities, but also damage our council assets, cause disruption to the delivery of our services, generate huge unfunded financial impacts, and affects, of course, the well-being of our communities, and particularly those many communities in remote and regional Australia who are just so vulnerable to weather extremes. Responding to and managing climate change and dealing with the current economic outlook is therefore of central importance to local governments, and in our strategic plan for 2020 to 2023, it of course includes priorities to address the risk of climate change and stronger community resilience as two of our key priorities. Over the past 2 years, local governments across Australia have had to deal with extraordinary natural disasters, bushfires, floods, drought, and of course now the pandemic. More than 110 councils were impacted by the most recent summer bushfires. Many are still rebuilding, and I know that includes many of you today. Over 100 councils were impacted by the prolonged drought, and again, some sadly remain in that situation today. And of course, there was the double whammy of council areas impacted by the drought and bushfires. There's no doubt these weather events will increase and councils will increasingly be called on to protect our communities to help them recover. And of course, therefore, we have a strong role in the prevention of these changes. Much of the evidence indicates that the mega bushfire seasons, such as the most recent summer, are really going to become more frequent, as will droughts, heat waves, storms and other extreme events. We're doing everything we can, and I know all of you are, to deal with the risks and the impact, but there's so much more together we can all do. And we know that these things are really well managed at the local level by councils. Even though we are the least resourced level of government, and this is an extremely important point to make, I think, as the least resourced level of government, we are making commitments and taking action at the local level. The 2021 Australian Local Government Climate Review demonstrated that the scope of climate action undertaken by councils is really significant. And if you've got a pen, now's the time to get that out. So 73% of the councils that responded to the Local Government Climate Review have set or are planning to set ambitious corporate or operational emissions reduction targets. That's pretty impressive, 73%. 80% of responding councils have set or are investigating developing community-wide emissions reductions targets. That shows you across the nation the real scope of change that councils together in Australia are working on. The ICLEI State of Report found that if, and this is my favourite statistic of all time in this area, if all the Australian local government targets were met, these commitments would bring Australia 96% of the way towards meeting its current emissions reduction target of 28% by 2030. So if local governments are resourced to meet the targets we've already set, 96% of the way we're there. And I can assure you, when I sit down with Minister Angus Taylor's office tomorrow, that's the first statistic that I'll be talking to him about. These results speak for themselves. Working in partnership with other levels of government, councils can and are delivering highly effective climate change projects that mitigate against the production of dangerous emissions, greatly assist the community to be better prepared and are better able to adapt to future climatic conditions. Early planning and preparation to minimise the impacts of climate change in these local communities will reduce the long-term economic, social and environmental costs. Local governments are very willing partners and we have very good ideas and proven successful means of enacting all these changes in a meaningful way. Climate is just so important. Councils have identified shifting policy at other levels of government and a lack of political will and legislative limitations as the top barriers to taking action on the climate emergency. And so it is, of course, really significant for us that the COP talks result in success and that it does also offer a stable level of state and government policy for us all to work with. We know councils continue to be concerned about the uncertainty in investing limited rate funds in long-term projects, such as managing emissions from landfills or setting up systems to divert organic waste, fleet conversions to electric vehicles, decentralised energy grids and other energy projects without more certainty about the work that is being done at other levels of government and their policies. But in these challenging times, we do want to urge you to continue doing that great work, to support that local investment in projects that can make communities more resilient. We all can share these great ideas as we look for new ways to restart our local economies as a result of COVID. So the lead up to COP26, we know, puts a sharp spotlight on climate change action and the commitments, and it's a great opportunity to highlight the role of local governments as a critical partner in managing and mitigating the impacts of climate change. We're, of course, seeking to advocate to the Commonwealth Government about what those measures should be, what the policies should be that they take to COP. We look forward to meeting with the Minister's Office tomorrow, and we look forward to working extremely hard in the lead up to COP so that we can represent the views of the local government sector and see them take policies to COP that will truly make a difference to councils and our communities. Thanks so much.
Thank you very much, Councillor Scott. Those very important messages that we know all too well about the power of local government, however, the need for realistic resourcing. Just as an aside, we're very pleased to hear that you're meeting with Minister Taylor tomorrow. He was invited to attend this meeting and was unfortunately unavailable due to parliamentary commitments, but he sent us a brief message, and I'll just read that out because this could be useful for the ALGA discussions tomorrow. Minister Taylor said he looks forward to unveiling Australia's long-term emissions reduction plan ahead of COP26. Governments at all levels have an enabling role to play to support the investment, technologies and projects needed to make net zero practically achievable. So a little bit of ammunition for tomorrow's meeting. Moving right along, because we don't have a lot of time today, I'd like to introduce the third of our local government leader speakers, and this is Honourable Lord Mayor Anna Reynolds. Anna is Lord Mayor of Hobart. She's also representing the Council of Capital City Lord Mayors today, so thank you for that. And Anna wears some other hats as well. She's a member of the ICLEI Oceania Regional Executive Committee, and importantly, she sits on the international board of the Global Covenant of Mayors for Climate and Energy as our Oceania representative. So Anna plays a very critical role in making that nexus between our local action through to the international arena. Thank you, Anna.
Thank you, Steve. And thanks everyone for joining and your interest. I'm speaking to you today from Nipaluna, Hobart, and it's the land, the custodians of the Palawa people. And I am, as Steve mentioned, representing the Council of Capital City Lord Mayors today, which is on behalf of the chair of the CCCLM at the moment is the Lord Mayor of Brisbane, and he sends his apologies. So thank you to ICLEI and ALGA for your contributions. And I think you've covered some really important points that I would probably repeat and reinforce because I think we're all in furious agreement about the importance of local government and the work that we can do together. The Capital Cities Council of Capital City Lord Mayors has existed for 60 years, and our job is to bring the voice of capital cities to the national government in particular. And we have been advocating for stronger action on climate change, and that by working with cities, stronger action in Australia is not only possible, but it is essential. We do need to work together and we do need to act fast. We know that our communities, particularly young people, will take great confidence if they see all levels of government working together to tackle this crisis. And without this collaboration, we are dealing with communities that are feeling very, very deeply concerned about the future. Most Australian capital cities are now in their second or third generation of emission reduction targets, moving beyond the low-hanging fruit of the corporate emission reductions to more complex issues where we don't have direct control of emissions, but we are playing an important role to work collaboratively with other governments and business and community. Our level of government does stand to act as a major partner, and as Linda and ALGA is going to take forward to the government, I'm sure we are trying to have our voices heard by the federal government that we are here, we are ready, And we are skilled at taking action to get Australia's emissions reductions down. I think it's quite ironic that it's become this kind of binary choice between technology or taxation, when so many of us in local government know that there are so many more options than just technology or taxation for change. And that includes regulation, education, innovation, and organisation, public education. We can actually work on the ground with citizens and businesses to tackle climate change. A lot of the reductions end up being used or responsible. The responsibility for them is in the cities where the populations are, and we can really push our businesses and our residents and help them live a lower carbon lifestyle. So I'm sure many of you here on this call today are deeply alarmed about the climate extremes on our communities, and that's one of the reasons you're active and you're here today. So obviously the urgency of our message isn't just about the reductions, it is about the fact that our level of governments are the ones that are having to pick up the pieces after climate emergencies and natural disasters, and we're not getting sufficient support or recognition of that increasing burden on our budgets and on our populations. So I look forward to the remainder of the forum and all of your comments or questions. Thanks, everyone.
Terrific. Thank you very much, Anna. And we might come back to you. We've got a bit of a curly question for you in a minute, but I've been asked to ask everyone to make sure your camera's on, and on the count of 3, we'll do the big smile or frown or grimace so that Jessica can take a family photo. So countdown, 3, 2, 1. Thank you. All done, Jess? Yep, she says that's good. And can I just encourage you two to use the chat box, because we're now able to move into a panel session. We don't have a lot of time, probably about 10 minutes. Jess, not sure, I saw one question addressed to Linda, but why don't I start with Anna, because Anna, you spoke very strongly about the need to advocate for national support for Australian governments, but can you comment a little bit more on the link to COP26 and why it's so important, even while we're working at the level of worm farms and zero waste here, to contribute this into the international decision-making process of the COP?
Well, I think the international process recognises local government better than the Australian government does. So it is the COP and all of the key players at the COP and many of the governments are working very closely with their local governments, and will be expecting the voice of local governments in the international negotiations. I know that the Global Covenant of Mayors and other global alliances are working very hard to have local government and cities and councils recognised in the agreement, so that that for those national governments that aren't as committed to working with local government, they are, I guess, pointed to the important role that working with cities and local government can achieve.
Okay, that's great. Thank you. Jess, I'm throwing to you because you've been keeping an eye on the chat box. How are we going? Have we got a question you'd like to put on the table?
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Steve. And this question is to Councillor Linda Scott from Alderman Morgan Rickard from the City of Darwin, Larrakia country. And the Alderman is keen to know how City of Sydney and ALGA are addressing climate change via investment policy.
Thanks to Alderman Rickard for his question. I think my lovely colleague, Jess Miller, who's also here from the City of Sydney, has popped in a few notes about some work she's done at my council, which is fantastic. And again, in the notes, if you have a look, Kate Reid, thanks Kate, has popped in the city's environmental policy, so you can have a look at that. But there's been I've moved motions on this, as have others, to ensure that the city's investment policy is really aligned with the council's very firm views about the need to take action on climate change. So there's that copy there. If only Alga sort of had masses of money to invest, I could give you a good answer on that one. But we're a very lean, tiny organisation with a small secretariat based in Canberra. And of course, the way to impact Alga's agenda is to move motions at our conference. So we really very much are a servant of the nation's councils. And when people move motions at their own council, to then ask Alga to advocate for them and bring those motions to our conferences. That's how and where we determine our priorities, and that's the views that our board listens to. So if people would like to, continue to see Alga do more work on this or do different work, please, by all means, we look forward to seeing your motions. We look forward to seeing you at our conference. But more generally, Alga is really very serious about working very closely with the Commonwealth to ensure they understand our views and to ensure they're also supporting councils, as I said, to realise the very good and ambitious targets that we all have. We're very close to a federal election, and so we're also, of course, very close to releasing Alga's asks for the Commonwealth election. And as part of that, we've long advocated for significantly more funding for councils to do this work, to make the transition and to fund those very ambitious climate reduction targets that we all have. We have called for the Commonwealth Government to increase federal assistance grants. These are the payments we all receive from the Commonwealth Government to 1% of Commonwealth taxation revenue. They're currently at about 0.55%, having dropped significantly from under the Keating government when they were close to 1%. We know this funding will support councils. And specifically, we've also asked for a local government climate change response partnership fund of $200 million over 4 years to help councils support our communities to reduce emissions and understand and transition to the future. So we are working very, very hard on all the on behalf of all the councils to help the Commonwealth understand the work we're doing, help them understand, the need to set ambitious targets to protect our communities, but also to fund the work that we would all like to do to support our communities to do the same. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Linda. And just to add another aside, we also invited the Minister for Environment, Susan Ley, to attend today. And look, she said she would have really liked to, she simply could, but she sent her best wishes. So there are those Commonwealth links. And it's intended to send the statement from today's forum, which Councillor Stone spoke about earlier, to both of the ministers. So that will be communicated back. I'm keeping an eye on the time because we need some input from our Global Advocacy Coordinator before we close, but I'd like to direct a question to Councillor Stone without notice. And it's really picking up on Ray Minicon's very, very powerful message to us, because I think most of us would acknowledge so far we're not very good at incorporating the Indigenous voice in our climate programs and in our climate advocacy, both nationally and internationally. Amanda, do you have any thoughts you can share with us about how local government can more effectively work with our traditional owners, our First Nations?
It's a really good question, and I guess local governments, even though they do wonderful work, still sort of tend to segment their areas of work, don't they? So there will be a whole part of council operations that focuses on Aboriginal partnerships and partnerships with Indigenous groups and so on. I guess the work that's being undertaken through Cities with Nature councils, for example, where lots of local governments are starting to learn the value and benefit from the value of learning from traditional owners about managing land in a more sensitive and sustainable way, and are engaging very actively with businesses that are run by Indigenous individuals and groups to manage land better. And that's a really growing area of expertise, interest and activity in local government. And it not only provides a model for actively working with our traditional owners with the big issues that affect all of us, but actually starting from the ground up, which is the land, which is what Pastor Ray was talking about, and using that shared knowledge and understanding of that to build on what do we need to protect our climate and even more so biodiversity as well. So that's a bit of a garbled response for something without notice. And it's, if anybody listening in today has some good examples of that level of engagement, it would be really wonderful to hear about it.
Thank you very much, Amanda. Yes, it is a hard one to answer off the cuff like that, but a very important one for us, I think, to keep in mind. I would like to move across to Yunus Arakan, I think, now, and I'd like to introduce Yunus. He's actually ICLEI's Global Advocacy Coordinator. So Yunus will explain that to us, but basically he's the focal point for the entire local government, municipal association constituency around the world, funneling the important messages into the COP26 process. And Yunus is going to speak to us briefly about that mechanism and how local voices can feed into international climate decision-making. So Yunus, and what we'll do then, Yunus, we'll show your video again. The video didn't work very well at the start. It's only 1.5 minutes produced by Yunus's unit. So at the end of Yunus's address, we'll play that 1.5 minute video. Thank you. Over to Yunus.
Thank you, Steve. It's a distinguished honor for me to join this very exciting and ambitious and enthusiastic panel of local and regional governments across Australia. I'd like to also acknowledge Pastor's comments and his moving speech on behalf of Indigenous people of Australia. And I'd like to congratulate ALGA and the collaboration with all those partners of this this initiative. I think it is perfectly timely, and I was really very happy to hear all the outcomes. As Steve mentioned, ICLEI has a role to provide input to the negotiations in our capacity as a stakeholder, a constituency of local and regional governments. Therefore, even though you have limitations of your physical presence at COP, especially for this year's unique conditions, we would like to make sure that all around the world our voices are heard at various sessions. I remember in Madrid, the introductory welcome remarks on behalf of LGMA was already announced by another Australian local government councillor. So that's example how we are trying to keep Australian voice into the process, despite the distances. I'd like to once again highlight, yes, there's a difference of Paris Agreement. This is now not anymore climate work as a voluntary job. We have been working for more than 2 decades until Paris Agreement, since 1990, to make sure that our recognition is done. So Paris Agreement is now has a preambular paragraph that thanks to our work, but it is the important one is implementation, and that's why Paris is as equally important as Glasgow, or Glasgow is as equally important as Paris, because with Glasgow a second era is starting, and what we were calling as LGM is that it is time for multi-level action. The principle of multi-level collaboration is now becoming a reality, from the US to Dominican Republic, from Chile to Rwanda, Japan, Korea, across the world. There are more than 60 nations who have raised their ambition because they work with their local and regional governments. And I think that's a very powerful message to Australian local governments. What you would be doing, and I'm impressed with the figures mentioned by mayors and the presidents of the associations, that you have a justification why there should be a collaboration between Australian governments. Yes, you are working hard for that, but I think there's never a role to give up. I'm very eager to hear your meeting tomorrow. This is the second point. Multi-level collaboration is key, but local government's role is even more important, because in the preamble, we have a responsibility. So every municipal plan has to be Paris compatible. And that is here, congratulations to Australian leadership once again. the notion of climate emergency, declaring climate emergency at the council level, has become a notion that kicked off from Australia. And especially to make sure the political ownership and citizen engagement to the commitments on race to zero, race to resilience, council decisions are important. So I encourage once again to move hundreds of Australian local governments to make the connection between climate emergency declarations that you have done in hundreds of councils to your commitment to race to zero. And we have done this also I addressed this at the Daring Cities conference a couple of weeks ago. So we would be happy to work with you on that, because that will make sure our commitments are also become a reality. And finally, multi-level collaboration is also not just the national government, as you have mentioned, indigenous people, but also parliamentarians, especially in the case of Australia, the power of legislative bodies. I think when you have the inertia from the government, the use of legislative bodies will be important. I encourage you to continue to your innovation. Coming to very concrete cases at COP26, we will have a pavilion for 2 weeks in the Blue Zone. We would like to make sure every voice are heard. And on the 3rd of November, we will have a special session of Time for Multi-Level Action, East Asia and Oceania Dialogue. So this will be one of the opportunities where we would be able to connect with you, to the negotiators. We would be happy to, if you can extend the invitation to Australian government, that we can invite to the LGMA Multi-Level Action Pavilion to make your voices heard. And we will continue to raise the profile of Australian local governments in this effort. And I think that was also mentioned. The climate is not just standalone, it's not isolated. At the biodiversity space, we have a huge progress. We would like to make sure that there's a connection. Circularity is becoming an issue. And next year, there will be huge progress again, that there will be World Urban Forum, so that this new type of civilization, new type of urbanization is what we would like to achieve. And through Australia, would like to reach the rest of Oceania. I think that was a snapshot from my side, Steve. If there's anything I'm missing, I don't want to take too much of your time. But once again, a fantastic leadership from Australian local governments. We are delighted to support this both at the national and global level, and we'll make sure that your voices are heard and the impacts with the positive wave of momentum, the second phase of Paris Agreement, a new era for multi-level action, also reaches to Australia through your leadership. Thank you very much, Steve.
Thank you, Yunus. That's really important. And I think there is a very vibrant local government sector here, which would like to benefit from that mechanism. Could I ask you, you mentioned briefly that on the 3rd of November, there will be a session for East Asia and Oceania in the multi-level pavilion. And I think that's the opportunity where we could channel the statement from today's forum into the UNFCCC process. Is that how you see that?
One of the channels, that's for sure. This will be a 90-minute session. We throughout the 2 weeks and at the end of, so the COP is concluding at the Cities and Regions Day on the 11th of November. On that day, we will also try to culminate. There is other outcomes. For example, we have food declaration, we have biodiversity statement, Edinburgh process. So we will try to map all the initiatives that is coming from national or regional global efforts, so that you can share your details of your communique at this event. But it will not be just that. We will try to make sure there is a register of what we have compiled from each of our partners, so that then we can present it to the UNFCCC with the RISE channels. So we have good relation with the champions, with the presidency. So I'm sure we will make sure every opportunity so that this is feeding into the COP26 and Glasgow discussions.
Great, thank you for that. And when the details are clearer, particularly for the 3rd of November, we will no doubt be reaching out to one or more of our mayors to participate. So.
Exactly, because that is the beauty. It is a hybrid event. It will be possible to make online connection, and we particularly scheduled it at early time in the UK, so that time-wise, Australian colleagues can also join us live virtually. So more details to come, but follow us, and Steve and his colleagues will share with you all the details. And once again, thank you all leadership of all our leaders. Steve, the floor is back to you.
Very nice. Thank you, Yunus. Nice to hear from you. And Jessica, do you think we can get the video working? Thank you very much. And congratulations, Jess, for getting the technology to work for us. I think that, Eunice, that video is probably available for others to use, correct? If anyone on the call today is interested, you could do that.
Yeah.
Right.
I just shared on the chat box the link to YouTube channel,
Right.
and we can also include in your outcome document so that people can also use this. So
Right.
we're more than happy to spread it around the world.
That's good. Thank you very much. And look, ladies and gentlemen, we've actually reached the hour, so we'll need to finish the forum now. We'd like to thank all the speakers and the people who contributed to the chat. I haven't really had a chance to fully keep up with the chat function, but there's some great and very important dialogues going on there. Just before we finish, we've heard now that the pathway from this forum will be a communique fed into the UNFCCC process, as we discussed. We do have a little treat for you, and it'll actually be after the closing, so we'll close right on 4 o'clock. But we've got a 3-minute video that we think you might like to see. And this is the result of a youth and children's art competition where they had to render a painting which said how I feel about climate change. And it was run during the Innovate for Cities Congress last week. It was a prize, and ICLEI was pleased to be able to award one of the prizes. It's a rather heartbreaking video, but I think it's an important way to finish this forum. So thank you all. I hope you found today very productive, and I hope you enjoy this short video. Thank you. Thanks, Jess. Let's see if we can make the video work. And the link to this video will be put in the chat box as well.